Welcome everyone to the second session of Mishnah in Depth Zevachim with Rabbi Avie Walfish. This is part of the Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in her memory by her family. This class is working with the standard daily Mishnah study schedule. We are assuming you're learning 1 to 2 mishnayot each day, and over a period of weeks and months, we will finish tractates and even entire orders, as we recently did. And for those who have not had the pleasure of learning with him, Rabbi Avie taught Talmud and Jewish thought at the Herzog College in Alon Shvut. He was the head of the Masters of Education program in Talmud and Jewish thought at Michlala College. He is a musmach of Rav Zalman Nechemiah Goldenberg and a student and a graduate of Hebrew University. He has published and taught extensively on mishnayot, and we are very happy to have him back. Sources for today's class will be posted in chat momentarily, and you're welcome to follow along. They will also be shared on screen. With that, I'm going to hand things over.
Okay, thank you, Kayla. Okay, we'll just review some of the main concepts that we'll be making use of in Prakim Gimel Dalid. For those of you who either weren't there last week or may have forgotten a thing or two since last week, but if you've been following along the Mishnah Yomit, then you should find that the main terms and concepts repeat themselves a lot in chapters 3 and 4 from what we had in chapters 1 and 2. But just make sure we're all on the same page. We talked last week about how the Torah presents the sacrifices. The Torah starts off with the voluntary sacrifices, the korbanot nedava, starting off with the korban olah, which is offered entirely to God, moving from there to the korban shlamim. Only afterwards, sacrifices that are obligatory, usually based on a sin that one wants to atone for. So we had the chatat and the asham offerings. As we will see, probably we'll be discussing this in the next shiur. We'll be having in 2 weeks' time. Next week is Tisha B'Av, so we won't be learning together. But the following week, where we'll be doing, I guess, around 4 chapters, one of the main topics I'll want to look at there is the order of sacrifices, how the rabbis, the hierarchy of sacrifices as the rabbis presented, comparing it with the Torah's hierarchy. Another main point that we discussed last time was how the rabbis introduced a feature of sacrifices that doesn't seem to be emphasized in the Torah. The Torah emphasized about sacrifices what you do with them. Okay, is the sacrifice entirely offered on the altar, the olah, which seems to be at the top of the heap as far as the Torah is concerned? Do the Kohanim eat the main part of the sacrifice? Is the main part of the sacrifice consumed by the one who brings it and his invitees? That's the main focus of the Torah, because that defines the sacrifice. What do I do? What exactly am I doing? Am I offering something to God? Am I enjoying a festive meal? Okay, which is partly devoted to God, and part of it is my participation in that meal. Okay, or is it atonement, which for whatever reason the Kohanim eat? Okay, and the rabbis in the Mishnah introduce another element that the Torah doesn't really address, certainly not explicitly, and that is intention. What is going on in the person's mind as he offers the sacrifices? And so the tractate opened with what happens if I make a mistake and an animal that was designated for one kind of sacrifice, when I actually bring the sacrifice, then the various actions, starting with shchita and running on through other forms of service, mostly about focusing on the blood service, receiving the blood, Kabbalah, holacha, moving the blood from the place where the animal is slaughtered to the Mizbeach, and finally, and most importantly, the Zrika, okay, the dashing or sprinkling, depending on what kind of sacrifice we're talking about, or daubing for some sacrifices of the blood on the altar. Okay, so if while I'm doing one of those things, I have I am intending the wrong sacrifice, so what are the results of that? We'll be coming back to discuss that, so I'm not going to elaborate on that right now. We discussed it last week, and we'll be picking up on it again later. And then chapter 2 introduced the notion, the two notions of doing something bachutz, outside of the place where it's supposed to happen. Let's say I have the intention of eating part of the sacrifice outside of the temple, or I intend to offer the burnt parts. Almost every sacrifice has at least a part of it that gets burnt on the altar. And I intend to do it, rather than doing it on the altar inside the temple, I intend to do it outside. I'll take it to some altar outside the temple and offer it there. Okay, or outside of the time framework. The Torah is a time framework for these services, and I intend to do one or another of these actions related to the sacrifice outside of the appointed time. Either of those two improper intentions will disqualify the sacrifice, with a difference that we'll come back to, so I won't elaborate on it now. But that's just to get us on the same page in terms of the main concepts that will continue to accompany us through chapters 3 and 4. Okay, so in looking chapters 3 and 4, I'm going to start off at the end. Okay, we'll see why in just a bit. Okay, so here we'll do a share screen, and yeah, there we go. Okay, this is the last Mishnah of chapter 4. L'shem shisha dvarim hazevach nizbach. Okay, I'm not going to translate. I put it up here in the Svaria translation, so anyone who needs the translation can just follow along. I'll just read it in the Hebrew. L'shem shisha dvarim hazevach nizbach. L'shem zevach, l'shem zoveach, l'shem Hashem, l'shem ishim, l'shem reach, l'shem nichoach, v'chatat v'asham, l'shem chet. Okay, so and then we have the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, which we won't discuss just now. We'll come back and discuss him a bit further on. Okay, but let's just look a bit at not only the content of this Mishnah, but the nature of this Mishnah. Okay. Let me start off by saying, you read this Mishnah, and for me at least, one of the first questions that would occur to me in encountering this Mishnah for the first time is, I don't understand why this Mishnah is at the end of chapter 4, rather than, anyone want to suggest where they would probably want to put the Mishnah? this Mishnah?
Earlier.
Earlier. How much earlier?
Introductory.
Exactly. I'd put this right at the beginning of the tractate. Okay, here we are, end of chapter 4. And this Mishnah looks like an ideal Mishnah to open the tractate. What am I bringing a sacrifice for? Okay, there are 6 things for which, now, l'shem, okay, is a familiar term to us. Okay, what does it remind us of? What very similar word have we already encountered? Look at the very beginning of the tractate. Kol hazvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman. Okay, for their name. Okay, the translator calls it for their sake, because translators translating idiomatically. This, by the way, one of the main problems with translations. Translators like to translate idiomatically, which has an advantage, of course. It makes it more comprehensible for the reader, but for the serious student of Mishnah, it has a very serious drawback, which is you miss the nuance, okay? Because when you translate idiomatically, you miss the nuance of the literal word. The literal word is for its name. The sake of the sacrifice means the name. Every sacrifice has a name. It's an olah, it's a shlamim, okay, it's a chatat, it's an asham, and a couple of other categories we can throw in, okay, and that's what it literally means. Okay, so you sacrifice it with the wrong name in mind. Now, the wrong name also means that I'm intending to do the wrong things with it. It's supposed to be an olah. So if I treat it as a shlamim, the blood work will be the same blood work, but from that point on, it's a completely different sacrifice. The olah sacrifice, I cut it into pieces and throw them onto the altar. The shlamim sacrifice, okay, I take some of the sections and bring them on the altar. I take a couple of other sections of the animal and give that to the Kohen, who then eats them, and I take the bulk of the animal and I give it to the one who brought the sacrifice and say, here, have a festive meal, invite whoever you like. Okay, so you know, you're missing all of these nuances when you say for their own sake. And the other thing that you're missing is that it's the same word that we just encountered here at the end of chapter 4. Okay, let's look at it again. Look how often the word shame comes up here. Okay, don't confuse it with the English shame. That's a different idea altogether. Okay, l'shem shisha dvarim hazevach nizbach. L'shem zevach. L'shem zoveach. And here's an interesting one. L'shem Hashem. For the name of the name. Of course, the second name is, he translated it idiomatically as God, but if we translated it literally, it's capital N name. Okay, for the name of the named one, the one with that great, holy, and glorious name. Okay, and several other things. Okay, that word gets hammered on. So we notice that the word lishman at the beginning of the tractate is actually looking forward towards this Mishnah. Okay, it's actually anticipating this Mishnah. So it really would make sense to open the tractate with this Mishnah. However, I'll suggest a couple of reasons why we don't open the tractate with this Mishnah. One of them is that this statement here is actually an agadic statement. Okay, it's not a halachic statement. Now, well, what do I mean when I call something halachic versus agadic? Halacha means something that is normative, it's binding. That's the law. Okay, I need to do something in a certain way. If I don't do it that way, then it's improper. Okay, and in most cases, what that means is I will have disqualified the sacrifice. Or at the beginning of the tractate, what we saw is I may, in most cases, other than the chatat and the Pesach, I don't disqualify the sacrifice, but I undermine its impact as far as the one who brought the sacrifice is concerned. He has to then replace it with another one. But as far as he's concerned, it's as though he brought nothing. The sacrifice is valid, but he didn't bring it. Okay, he didn't fulfill his obligation because it wasn't the right sacrifice. He had the wrong intention, and so that undermines its value as far as he is concerned. Now, all of these are legal statements.
So
the
what's
Mishnah-
done with the meat of it?
Excellent question. Okay, the Mishnah doesn't really answer that question. The Talmud does, or the Talmud actually doesn't explicitly answer the question. It implicitly answers the question. The Talmud calls the improper intention an akira. Akira means you have uprooted the original meaning, and what it sounds like from the Talmud's discussion is, I would continue with the new name. I've uprooted the old name. I originally brought it as an olah, and then when I slaughtered it, I thought, oh, this is a shlamim. So the Talmud calls that an uprooting, and what that seems to mean is that I'll continue offering it as a shlamim and not as an olah, as the original designation of it has been undone, has been uprooted. Okay, akira, in the Talmudic language. So that seems to be the Talmud's answer to that question. But interestingly, the Mishnah never really addresses that question, and based on the Mishnah, it could really give two opposite answers to that question. But what it seems is, and this itself is an interesting thought, I'm bringing the sacrifice because I want to accomplish something on the spiritual plane. And the Mishnah at the beginning of the tractate says, I didn't accomplish what I set out to accomplish, but a sacrifice was brought. Now, it's almost as though the temple brought a sacrifice. A sacrifice was brought. Who brought it? I don't really have an answer to that question. Nobody brought it. Nobody gets credit for the sacrifice. But the sacrifice itself is a sacrifice. So you can almost say, as far as the temple functioning is concerned, a sacrifice in the temple was brought. God and the priests, the Kohen, the Am Yisrael as a whole, have somehow come together through this sacrifice, but the individual who brought it, and is supposed to be deriving some kind of spiritual benefit from having brought the sacrifice, he lost it. He's got to bring another one instead. Okay, so that itself is an interesting concept that comes up at the beginning of the tractate. And if we look at this Mishnah, I think you can see that there's a real foundation for this idea in this Mishnah. Okay, let's look a little more closely at these six things. First of all, I'd just like to note, since I like to pick up on literary features of the Mishnah, this is a very highly literary Mishnah. The six things, okay, Notice the rhythm of the 6 things for the name of which, literally, one brings a sacrifice. L'shem shishas dvarim hazevach nisbach. So you already have that noun and verb. You have a lot of that in Hebrew. The zevach is nisbach. Nisbach here, zevach means an offering. But nisbach probably means the slaughtering. Okay, the word zevach is, lizboach is really an ambiguous word. It literally means to slaughter. It's a cognate word to tevach, toveach. Okay, tevach, unfortunately, here in Israel, has taken on a terrible connotation over the past couple of years. What happened on October 7th, close to 2 years ago, is always called the Tevach of October 7th, okay, which means slaughtering. Okay, Zevach, Zayin and Tet are often interchangeable letters. Zevach and Tevach are really cognate words, and they both mean to slaughter. But Zevach, in addition, has the connotation in many places of sacrifice. Now, I think that wordplay is intended here. The Zevach, which is the sacrifice, is Nizbach, is slaughtered. When I slaughter the sacrifice, I need to have 6 things in mind, says the Mishnah. Now let's look how the 6 divide up. L'shem zevach, l'shem zoveach. I think you can all agree that's a pair. Okay? For the offering itself, meaning the kind of offering it's supposed to be, olah, shlamim, chatat, whatever. L'shem zoveach. That's the one who offers it. And notice how these are 2 separate things. You need to have in mind what sacrifice I'm bringing. You need to have in mind for whom. There is a zoveach. There's the one who brought the sacrifice. I'm offering it on his behalf. I have him in mind. L'shem Hashem, for the name of the name, meaning God. I intend it to be for God. I'm offering it before God. That, of course, is the, perhaps the most profound meaning. L'shem ishim. Now notice, the same way that zevach and zoveach go together, Hashem and ishim go together. First of all, just in terms of the alliteration, right? Hashem ishim. You have the same letters, the same sounds in these 2 words. And what does ishim mean? The fires. Offering it to God and offering it to the fires are 2 different perspectives on the same thing. What does God, quote unquote, get from the offering? He gets what the smoke that comes up to heaven from the fires. The part that's burned on the altar goes up to God. And then l'shem reach, l'shem nichoach. In the Torah, reach and nichoach always go together. Okay, reach nichoach is a phrase that appears many times together in the Torah, and it's also alliterative. Reach nichoach, again, the same letters, same sounds. So you have 3 pairs: Zavach zoveach, Hashem ishim, reach nichoach. And in all 3 cases, the pairs are alliterative, they sound alike, and they also mean alike. Okay, for the sake of the type of sacrifice and for the sake of the one who brings it, for the sake of God and the sake of the fire, for the sake of the fragrance, and for the sake of nichoach. Now, what does nichoach mean? Okay, there are midrashim that here he translates it as pleasing, okay, from the word nachat. Same word as nachat, right? Okay, or, you probably know it as nachas, right? So Here in Israel, we pronounce it nachat. Okay, but it's the same word as the Yiddish nachas. Okay, it's actually a Hebrew word. Nichoach, it's the same root. Okay, the sake of putting God's mind at ease, as it were. Okay, so reach and nichoach go together. The fragrance of the sacrifice and God's acceptance of it. God's sort of nodding and saying, I'm glad he did that. I'm happy with what just happened here. Those two also go together. So there's a very, I think, deliberate, carefully crafted literary structure to this list of 6 aspects of what one intends when you bring a sacrifice. Okay, so Zevach and Zoveach are what goes on down here. Okay, that refers to, okay, the people down here and what they're doing. Hashem and Ishim refer to what the temple does. The temple brings this to God, brings this before God. Reach and Nichoach then are the consequence. Okay, what we achieve. Okay, we achieve, let's say, a closer, more intimate, and maybe happier or more peaceful relationship with God as a result of the sacrifice. Okay, so these are all different aspects. And let me come back to the point I started with a few minutes ago. This is not a halachic Mishnah. There are no halachic consequences, let's say, for the person not intending reach and not intending nichoach. I bring the sacrifice and I don't intend it for it to have a pleasant fragrance. Does that have any legal consequences? None whatsoever. I don't intend for God to be happy with it. Okay, I didn't intend it. I certainly don't intend for him to be unhappy with it, but I didn't intend for him to be happy with it. So all of these statements here are not really legal statements. That's why I call this an agadic Mishnah. A halachic Mishnah has real legal consequences. Either the sacrifice itself is completely disqualified, or at the very least, the person who brought it, even if the sacrifice is valid, the person who brought it has to replace it with another one. So that's a legal consequence. And here, there are no legal consequences. Here, it's just, this is what I ought to be doing. And if I don't, so I didn't do it in the best possible way. And that's typical of agadic mishnayot. The Agadah, by the way, very often sets a much higher standard than the Halacha does. The Halacha is generally satisfied with a minimum standard. And the Agadah says, I expect more of you. Okay? You can be given a task to do, and you can do the bare minimum, or you can do it with all your heart and soul, okay? And that could mean doing a better job. It can mean doing it more cheerfully, okay? It could mean the way in which you interact with the person who imposed that task upon you, okay? All of those things would be icing on the cake, right? That's Agadah. Agadah very often demands of you, put the icing on the cake. Don't just bake the cake. Put the icing on. Put the cherry on top. Make it something festive. Make it something meaningful. Let everyone see you're doing it wholeheartedly. That's what the Agadah. Those are the kinds of things the Agadah does. That's what chapter 4 ends with. And this typically in the Mishnah appears at the end of units rather than at the beginning. There are a couple of exceptions where a unit will open with agadic statements. More typically, the Mishnah will close a unit with the Agadah. The Mishnah is mostly halachic, and therefore the Mishnah will, in most places, reserve agadic statements for the end. Now that's an important observation because that basically signals to us that the first 4 chapters of Zevachim are a unit. And here's the end of the unit. This kind of a Mishnah, an agadic Mishnah, at the end of a chapter, and here, not only at the end of a chapter, the end of a section, okay, is a signal to us, an indication to us that these first 4 chapters have formed the unit. Okay, now another indication is what we saw earlier, that this Mishnah is really corresponding to the very first Mishnah of the tractate, and let's see that on the source sheet.
Just a question, quick question. KVA, so you have your hands up?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed. So you mentioned it's agadic and it doesn't have any legal consequences. The translator has inserted some text into there, right? Saying that these are the 6 things that you have to have. You must. In fact, the translator uses the word "must," that you must keep in mind when you're making a sacrifice. Are they going up like beyond the text? Are they going beyond even what the Talmud is saying on this Mishnah?
Okay, so my answer to that question, is yes. But even if their translation were accurate, it wouldn't automatically make it halachic. There are agadic statements that are formulated as must. Okay, but what makes it agadic is, and what if I don't? You must do it this way. Okay, does that automatically mean, and if I don't, then I've invalidated the whole thing?
But
Not
Rabbi,
necessarily. Okay.
in the 10 Commandments, it says you shall have no other gods before me. It doesn't say what happens if you have other gods before me. It just says don't.
That's right. So the 10 Commandments, so that's what I'm saying. The word must is not always unambiguous. In most places, must is a legal statement. There are agadic statements that are formulated in the imperative. Not always. Not all agadic statements are formulated with the imperative, but there are agadic statements that are formulated as as imperatives. Okay, so the translation doesn't automatically. The word "must" is not in the Hebrew. It just says "hazevach nizbach." Okay, if I were translating it and I were translating it literally, which is what I prefer translations to be, even if you're sacrificing some of the idiomatic sense of it, I would have said, for 6 matters, the sacrifice is slaughtered. That would be an accurate translation. And that would very definitely not orient you towards thinking that it's halachic. By using the word "must," the translator gave you the feeling that it's halachic, but as I say, even had it been an accurate translation, that wouldn't be a necessary conclusion. It would be a possible conclusion, maybe even a probable conclusion, not a necessary conclusion. Because there are agadic statements using the word "must," or using similar kinds of, an agadic statement could include the word "chayav." There are such statements. Okay, even though they're agadic, it uses the word chayav. What does chayav mean? It means that's what we expect you to do. That's what you're expected to do. If you don't do it, you have not met expectations. Not everyone who falls short of expectations has undone what he set out to do. Some don't say, okay, you didn't meet expectations, but we'll let it go. we'll accept it. Grudgingly, unhappily, but we'll accept it. Okay? So here, this is the phenomenon called by literary scholars inclusio. Okay, in more colloquial language, some call it envelope structure. Okay, or I've seen some who call it bookends. Okay, you open and close a unit, okay, with items that are in conversation with one another, that are reminiscent of one another, that you echo, okay, to quote T.S. Eliot, in my end is my beginning. It's from his 4 quartets. Okay, you end with something that appeared also at the beginning. Okay, so you have here l'shem, and here you have okay, so we've discussed that connection at some length. We open with the halachic statement. There is one of the lishman, there is one of the l'shems that will, or actually 2 of the l'shems that will invalidate the sacrifice, at least partially, and that's the first 2. If you fail to do it l'shem zevach, in other words, if I have the wrong sacrifice in mind, or if I fail to do it l'shem zoveach, I have the wrong person in mind. Let's say the Kohen is offering it. Okay, usually the Kohanim are the ones who did the slaughtering, even though they don't have to be. If we have time, we'll see that later on this in this shiur. But usually it's the Kohanim who actually did the slaughtering. So the Kohen slaughters it for the sake of the wrong person. He gets mixed up. He thinks Reuven brought this sacrifice. It's really Shimon's sacrifice. That's how the Shem Sovech. Both of those come under Zvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman. Okay? There's another interesting point we should note here, which is throughout the 4 chapters, slaughtering is always called shchita, which is the standard term for slaughtering. It appears frequently in the Torah, and it's the standard term in rabbinic literature. But here at the beginning and at the end, the term for slaughtering is lizboach. So that's another point of connection between the opening section and the closing. Here's the opening on the left, the legal consequences. And here is the agadic statement at the end, which includes the halachic part of it. Because if you fail in either l'shem zevach or in l'shem zoveach, that brings you to the situation described at the beginning. So that's an inclusio that marks off a unit, the first 4 chapters. Okay, we'll look more closely at that in just a bit. Another interesting connection is, if you look at the last Mishnah of chapter 1, the last Mishnah says it is not only slaughtering with improper intent that can be a problem, but azevach nifsal be'arba'a dvarim. There are 4 stages, is the best translation of dvarim here. Okay, idiomatically. Okay, literally it's matters. There are 4 matters. In other words, there are 4 stages of offering the sacrifice that can disqualify. The first of them is slaughtering. The second is Kabbalah, receiving the blood. The third is Holacha, bringing the blood to the Mizbeach. And the fourth is sprinkling the blood on the Mizbeach. So you have at the very beginning, at the end of chapter 4, you have L'Shem Shisha Dvarim, which now echo the Arba'a Dvarim at the end of chapter 1. That's another connection. There's actually a third connection I didn't put on the sheet, and that is that when it comes, as we saw earlier, when it comes to the chatat and asham, you also have to have the intention of l'shem chet. And Rabbi Eliezer at the beginning of the tractate mentions that chatat and asham are both brought because of a chet. Okay, so that's a third connection. So we have a very impressive inclusio that marks off these 4 chapters. Okay, now why is it important for us to know that this is a section? That the next Mishnah, the next chapter is a standalone chapter. We talked about it briefly in last week's shiur. The parak of Ezehu Mekoman that gives you a whole list of sacrifices and what is done with them. But there's something beyond that. Okay, let's look at what makes this into a section. Let's start off with 2 additional features of these 4 chapters. The first is epiphora. Okay, the first is anaphora, and the second is epiphora. Let's start off with the anaphora. How do the 4 chapters open? Okay, I'll repeat what I said at the end of last shiur, and everyone should bring a Mishnah to these classes. It's a bit unwieldy for me to always jump back and forth between source sheets and the text on Svaria. So you should have the text in front of you. I'll try as much as possible to put on the Svaria text that also has the translation. But you should have a Mishnah you can follow along with. So if you look at the opening of chapter 1, it opens with the words Kol HaZvachim. Chapter 2 opens with the words Kol HaZvachim. Chapter 3 opens with Kol HaPsulim. And chapter 4 opens with Kol HaNitanim. So the word Kol opens each one of these 4 chapters. And even more impressively, the first 2 chapters open with Kol HaZvachim. So the first 2 chapters seem to form a kind of unit of their own. So the Mishnah Yomit very conveniently divided up our weeks according to literary units. But here, something even more impressive, and that is the epiphora. Okay, anaphora means parallels of openings, and epiphora means parallels of endings. There's a key word that runs through these chapters, okay, thematically, but linguistically appears in 5 places in the first 4 chapters. 5 places. You thought I was going to say 4. Okay, we'll see why it's 5 in just a bit. Okay, it's very strategic. The end of chapter 1. Okay, if you look at the last Mishnah of chapter 1, so you'll see at the very end of the chapter, Rabbi Elazar says improper intention at the time of transporting the blood, what's called holacha, does not always disqualify. It's not always considered to be a disqualifying intention. It depends on where you slaughtered the animal and received the blood. So the text reads, okay, if you have a Mishnah in front of you, end of chapter 1, Rabbi Elazar Omer Amalech b'makom shehu tzarich lahalech hamachshava poselet. U'b'makom she'en tzarich lahalech ein hamachshava poselet. If he walks, in other words, if he's transporting the blood in a place where he needs to, meaning he slaughtered the animal and received the blood 50 meters away from the altar or 100 meters away from the altar, so he has to take the blood that he received and bring it to the Mizbeach. So then, hamachshava poselet. But, u'makom she'en tzarich lalech, well, let's say he slaughters it right next to the altar. Okay? So all he has to do, he receives the blood and then just turns around and there he is. He's at the altar already. So then, let's say at that moment, as he is turning around towards the altar to sprinkle the blood on the altar, at that moment, he says, and I am going to burn the entrails tomorrow. Or he says to himself, I'm going to eat this sacrifice on the third day. So Rabbi Elazar says, we discount that machshava. That machshava doesn't count. So Rabbi Elazar says machshava in the stage of holacha sometimes disqualifies and sometimes does not. Okay? Let's look at the end of chapter 2. The end of chapter 2. The end of chapter 2 talks about what happens when a person has both forms of disqualifying thoughts. See, chapter 1 talks about one type of disqualifying thought, and that is you intended the wrong sacrifice or the wrong zoveach, the wrong sacrificer. Chapters 2, 3, and most of chapter 4 are devoted mostly to two other kinds of disqualifying thoughts, which is called here, you see here on the screen in front of you, machshevet, okay, machshevet hazman and machshevet hamakom. You notice how these terms appear both at the end of chapter 2 and at the end of chapter 3, which indicates that chapters 2 and 3 belong together. Okay, so okay, so now, what does chapter 2 say about it? Machshevet zman means I intend to do one of the services at the wrong time. Machshevet makom means I intend to do it at the wrong place. And the Mishnah differentiates between the two of them. Both of them will disqualify the sacrifice, wholesale. However, machshevet hamakom will only disqualify the sacrifice. Machshevet hazman will do something additional. It will make the sacrifice an abomination called pigul. Okay, that's a key term in Tractates Zevachim, pigul, which is abomination. And as a result of its being an abomination, if a person were to consume any part of that sacrifice, he would then be cut off from his people, what's called karet. Chayav karet. There is no chiyuv karet for machshevet chutz limkomo, only for machshevet chutz lizmano. And now what the Mishnah says at the end of chapter 2 is that the Mishnah has been discussing, as it did in several mishnayot in chapter 2, what happens if I had both? Okay? I intend both in the wrong place and at the wrong time. So does it become pigul or not? It's certainly disqualified. That's not a question. Does it become pigul or not? Meaning, if I ate part of the sacrifice after these improper thoughts, okay, will that be an infraction that carries with it the punishment of karet or not? So, the the standard answer, the Tanakama's answer in chapter 2 is no. The only time there will be karet is if you have only machshevet chutz lizmano, but if you also have machshevet chutz limkomo, it doesn't become pigul. But at the end of the chapter, we bring the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, rather, who says it depends which came first. If the machshevet zman preceded the machshevet makom, then yes, it becomes pigul. But if the machshevet makom preceded the machshevet zman, then it doesn't become pigul. In other words, whichever one came first, gives the sacrifice its standing, and then the later improper intent is discounted. Okay, chapter 3 also echoes zmano and mikomo, but in a different setting altogether, because chapter 3 has discussed. Chapter 3 has discussed an additional issue. Okay, let's look at the very end of chapter 3. Mishnah 6. Shchato almena. Okay, not from the beginning. We'll pick up from a couple of lines into the Mishnah. Shchato almenat litno al gabei kevesh. I had the intention of placing the blood on the ramp that goes up to the altar. That's not exactly chutz limkomo. I'm not putting the blood in the right place. It's supposed to be on the altar. But on the other hand, I'm also not taking the blood outside of the temple. So that's technically not chutz limkomo. Or shelo keneged hayesod. Okay? I put the blood on one of the sides of the altar that is not opposite the appropriate part of the altar. At the base of the altar, there's something called a yesod, which doesn't completely surround the altar. So I want to put it on the altar in a place where underneath it is no yesod. Lateta tani tani lamata lamala. Different sacrifices, you're supposed to sprinkle the blood either on the lower portion of the altar or on the upper portion of the altar. So I intended the wrong thing. I say, you know what? I'm going to put the blood on the upper part when it's a korban olah, where the blood is supposed to go on the lower part. Okay, or vice versa. Or I intend not to eat it at the wrong time, but I intend to feed it to people who are impure, which means they're not allowed to eat the sacrifice. And I say, I couldn't care less. My brother is impure. I want him to join in on my festive meal. I don't care that he's impure. Okay? Or she'akrivu tmeim. Okay? There's a Kohen who's a good friend of mine. I want him to offer the sacrifice, even though he happens to be impure. All of these things, were they to happen, will disqualify the sacrifice. But if I have the intention of doing it, I'm slaughtering the animal. While I'm slaughtering the animal, I say, you know what? I'm going to put the blood on the ramp, or I'm going to put the blood on the wrong part of the altar, or I'm going to feed the meat of the korban to somebody impure. I'm thinking that while I'm slaughtering. What does the Mishnah say? That does not disqualify the sacrifice because, and here's the line at the end of the Mishnah, Ein hamachshava poselet, ela chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo. The only time an improper intent disqualifies is when it's either outside the temple or outside the time frame. Any other improper thoughts, obviously I shouldn't be having, but they will not disqualify the sacrifice. And finally, chapter 4. Okay, the end of the last Mishnah in chapter 4. Ein hamachshava holechet ela achar ha'oved. The improper intent follows the oved, the one who is performing the service. As opposed to whom? Okay, so let's remember how sacrifices are offered. Okay, I bring a sacrifice to the temple, and I might slaughter it myself, or I might hand it over to the Kohen to slaughter it. And then, who takes over from that point?
The Kohen.
The Kohen. So we can have a case where there's an Oved, but there's also a Zoveach, and they're not the same person. So we might, let's say that the Kohen is receiving the blood and thinking, as he's receiving the blood, he's thinking, I'm going to offer, I'm too tired to offer the entrails on the altar today. I'll do it tomorrow. That's what the Kohen is thinking. He is the Oved. And that will certainly disqualify the Korban. But what if while the Kohen is receiving the blood, the person who brought the Korban is observing and thinking, you know what? I'm going to eat the meat of this sacrifice on the third day. That will not disqualify the sacrifice. You know, I'm the one who brought the sacrifice. Sacrifice is on my behalf, but I'm not doing the service. And therefore, my improper thoughts don't count. The improper thoughts that count are the improper thoughts of the one who is doing the service, not the one who brought the sacrifice. That's what we have at the end of chapter 4. And notice how holechet, word holechet, which is used here in an abstract sense, in a borrowed sense, metaphoric. The thought, the improper thought, follows the one who does the service.
Wait a minute, but according,
At the end of chapter 1, you have hamehalech, the one who is walking. That's using the term literally. In chapter 4, we're using the same term, holacha, figuratively. So it's a word play that also links the end of chapter 1 to the end of chapter 4. We already noted another epiphora. Okay, chapter 1 ends with Arba'a Dvarim, chapter 4 ends with Shisha Dvarim.
but according to your example, the Kohen was the one who was thinking improperly, and he was carrying it out. So
Correct.
shouldn't that disqualify it?
That absolutely should disqualify it.
Oh,
The case that the Mishnah says will not disqualify it, or the Mishnah doesn't say, but the Mishnah implies is that the one who brought the offering, if he has an improper thought, we don't care.
so
Okay.
if,
Reuven brings a sacrifice, and as the Kohen is sprinkling the blood, Reuven is thinking, I'm not gonna finish this Korban Shlomim in 2 days. I'm gonna eat it on the third day. That's what he's thinking. And then he says, Oi, what did I do? I disqualified the sacrifice. And the Mishnah says, no, you didn't. You had an improper thought. We're not happy about it, but you did not disqualify the sacrifice because you weren't doing the act of service. You were a spectator at that point. Okay? The one who will disqualify by an improper thought is the Kohen who's actually doing the service. If while he's doing the service, the one who sent him to do it, as it were, he's the authorizing agent. Without him, the Kohen wouldn't be doing anything. But his improper thoughts don't concern us. That's what the Mishnah says at the very end. Okay, now let's just talk for a couple of minutes, okay, because our time is running out. So just for a couple of minutes, let's talk about the ramifications of these connections. Okay, the openings of the chapters, okay, beyond just signaling that these 4 chapters belong together, I think we could work something out, but that's a little complicated and sophisticated, not appropriate for our forum here. The epiphora, I think, is hugely interesting on a couple of levels. So first of all, the epiphora basically contains within it the germ of what these 4 chapters are all about, namely machshava. The chapter is all about machshava. Machshava means, in rabbinic Hebrew, not just what I have in my mind, but what I am intending to do, what I'm planning. Okay? What I'm planning to do with the sacrifice has the ability to disqualify it. And in the 4 chapters, we find 3 different kinds of improper plans that can disqualify the sacrifice. Improper plan regarding what kind of sacrifice this is, or for whom am I offering this sacrifice. Number 2, the wrong place. And number 3, the wrong time. Okay, so 4 chapters, 3 types of disqualifying thoughts or disqualifying plans. Okay, so that's one point. This really indicates to us as clearly as could be, what are these 4 chapters about and why are they a unit? That's what this unit is about. It's about how does improper thinking and planning disqualify sacrifices, and the answer is it doesn't always. Certain kinds of improper planning don't disqualify it at all. That's what we learned at the end of chapter 3. Sometimes it just breaks the connection between the offering and the offerer. That's at the beginning of chapter 1, or not the beginning, all of chapter 1. And sometimes, and this is the main theme of chapters 2 through 4, it completely disqualifies the sacrifice, and that in turn can be on 2 levels. Either it disqualifies it without rendering it an abomination, that's chutz limkomo, or it disqualifies it and also renders it pigul, abomination, and then renders it chayav karet. Okay. Now, one final point, which is indicated in this chart, and that is you can see a kind of chiastic structure here. Chapter 1 and chapter 4 correspond to one another. Chapters 2 and 3 correspond to one another. Okay, now we don't have time to work this through in detail, but if you go through chapters, you can see it for yourselves. If you look at, we don't have time to go through it now, but after the shiur, you can look at the additional parallels between chapters 2 and 3 and see how closely aligned these 2 chapters are with one another. And, okay, that's what this chart shows, many linguistic and thematic echoes. And what you can also see, and with this point we'll conclude, whereas chapter 2 focuses on the word pasul, okay, look at first line, ends with pasal, pasal, pasul, pasul. Okay? here as well, pasul, pigul. Chapter 3 gives you the contra, gives you the cases where it's not necessarily pasul. Sheshchita kshera bizarim. This is a Mishnah I promised you. Shchita kshera bizarim. A non-Kohen can do the shchita. That means even psulim can do the shchita. Even a pasul, even someone who is not fit for service in the temple can do the shchita. Then you have the word kasher. Then you often have the word yachzir. Yachzir means, okay, you get to press redo. There's a redo button you can press. No, it's not pasul. You did it wrong the first time, okay, go back and redo it. Okay, so you have yachzir, kasher. So chapter 3 focuses on the parallels to all the cases that are pasul in chapter 2. There are parallel cases in chapter 3 that are kasher or yachzir. Okay, so that sort of cements this chiastic structure of chapters 1 through 4. So we will conclude with that. And just a question to keep in mind as we continue going through Tractates Zevachim. Okay, you'll be learning on your own the next couple of over the next 2 weeks, you should be learning, I guess, around 4 chapters, something on the order of 4 chapters. See if you can follow the themes, particularly of Zman and Makom, as we continue to go through the tractate. Okay, see what echoes of Zman and Makom you can find in chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. We'll conclude with that, and I wish everyone an easy and meaningful fast in another week, unless Mashiach manages to come before then. And Bezrat Hashem, I will see you again the week following.
Thank you, everyone. And on that note, I have a scheduling thing to bring up. We will not meet next week on Tisha B'Av. We will resume the following week on August 10th. And in addition, there's a second scheduling note. As listed on the class website, there was originally not going to be class on the 24th of August, and a recording will be sent out to students in lieu of class. There will also not be class on our original finally scheduled date of August 31st. We apologize for the inconvenience. There were some scheduling challenges that we could not get around, but there still will be class. Please keep an eye on your email those week. And if you would like to join us at Drisha for Tisha B'Av, we have several classes going on in sponsorship with Yeshivat Chovevei Torah and Yeshivat Maharat, including keynote explanations and shiurim from 9 a.m. to about 4 p.m. You can find out more at drisha.org/classes. And I did want to bring up one last question, because I saw, Debbie, you posted this, and I think this is a really good question. Quote, is there somewhere I can read up and get a general framework for korbanot? I don't understand the difference between when a person would bring a chatat or an asham, or an olav or a shlamim versus a toda.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have handy. I'll see if I can come up with a good introduction to these laws.
All right. And is there any? Do you have? I'm happy to entertain one more question, but if not, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Keep following along with the class recordings on YouTube or on our audio library. The links have been posted in chat. And I hope to see you all on August 10th when classes resume.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone, and be well.